Hello and welcome back to another episode of Creedle. Today I am joined by Robert Mixa of the Word on Fire Institute. Robert and I just finished a 20-minute or so conversation. We've never met until today, so great to meet you, Robert. I'm excited to talk about Maximilian Kolbe and a bunch of other things today, but welcome to Creedle.
Thanks for having me, Zach.
Absolutely. No, excited to finally have you on. I've been reading your work from afar quite a bit lately. We're going to talk today about Maximilian Kolbe and some other things. I know you're a big Kolbe fan, as really every Catholic should be, let's be honest. Mm-hmm. But also you're married to someone from Poland, so Kolbe, I imagine, holds a very special place in the Mixa family hearts. But I'm excited to talk about all that today. Let's start here, though, Robert. Tell me a little bit more about your background. Were you born Catholic? Did you enter the Catholic faith later? And then what does the faith come to mean to you? I know that you've done a lot of work, and really, I guess I should probably actually read your bio before I do that. So let me do that. And then I'll pitch it to you, and you can tell me more. So, Robert is the Education Fellow at the Word on Fire Institute, working with Bishop Barron, and I'll ask him about some of the exciting things that are going on there on the education front. He studied philosophy at St. Louis University, and then studied at the Pontifical John Paul II Institute at CUA, Catholic University of America, in Washington, D.C., where he specialized, I think, in biotechnology. And correct me if that's wrong, Robert.
That's correct.
All right, excellent. And then has done a lot of teaching, a lot of education, especially in high school theology and philosophy. And so that is why he's a great candidate for the Education Fellow position at the Word on Fire Institute. That's what he does now. And I should also mention he's working with Bishop Barron for a long time, for years now, I think, going all the way back to Mundelein Seminary before Bishop Barron was a household name in Catholic circles, and was also involved, I think, in the Catholicism series, which you may have seen. It's one of Bishop Barron's earliest film works. And a great film overview of the faith if you haven't seen it already. So anyway, if I got any of that wrong, Robert, please correct me. But otherwise, welcome to Creedle.
No, that was a great description. Yeah, I grew up on the south side of Chicago, born and raised in a Catholic family. But it wasn't until I was going to be confirmed that I started taking the faith seriously. But just continue to grow and develop through the high school years, and then I decided I wanted to study philosophy, pretty much, though, to kind of better understand aspects of the faith. Then I met Bishop Barron right around the time I was graduating, and that was that. So I've been kind of involved my whole post-college career with Word on Fire, and it's been a great blessing.
It's been really cool to see Word on Fire just grow as a ministry. I've only been Catholic for 6 years. I didn't give you a whole lot of my background before we hit the record button, Robert, and my listeners have heard it before, but just very briefly, raised Protestant, sort of evangelical, floated around across various denominations, and then in 2015, entered the fullness of communion into the Catholic Church at the Easter Vigil. So 6 years. And I can't really say that Word on Fire was pivotal to me in my journey, just because I hadn't really discovered it and didn't really know about it. Had a few people mention it to me offhand, but have since come to understand that this is a major resource for people in their paths of conversion, reversion, and it's just really cool to see that bear so much fruit. There are some other ministries like it, but I think it and some other ones that have been doing that work for 10, 15 years have really provided a good model for lots of other ministries that are continuing in that mold and just trying to do the work of the new evangelization, carrying it out with a new urgency, I think, in the past, like I said, 10, 15 years. Long after JP2 called for it, I think now we're really taking up the mantle and trying to make it a reality, which is really cool. And it's neat to see Word on Fire continue to do that and just keep growing and having broader reach and all that. So thanks for your work there.
Oh, no, it's been a great privilege to be a part of this. And it is something to see how it's grown. I mean, when I first met Bishop Barron, he was just working on the 10-part Catholicism series.
And he was Father Barron, of course.
He was Father Barron, yeah. And I remember, my mom was like, oh, this guy, this great homilist is going to show up on the South Side. And he's got these homilies on, I think it was Relevant Radio, then before that WGN in the morning. He was just such a inspiration to me. I remember when his first talk, it was on St. Irenaeus, and I think all of these freshman undergrads showed up, and he was expecting grad students. So,
oh wow,
but he was great because he just played a pivotal role. He needed some help, so I got involved right away, and it's been a delight to see how it's grown.
That's great. And so you're the education fellow now. Maybe give me a little teaser. I'll ask you at the end sort of how people can get more involved and find out more about what's going on. But give me a little teaser of some things you're working on at the Word on Fire Institute now as the education fellow.
Yeah. So right now, I mean, the Word on Fire Institute's rather new. And I'm working on it's going to be like an education module for Catholic teachers, primarily at the high school level, but this would also include elementary level, to basically help them better not only understand the faith, but also certain strategies to effectively teach it. But the goal is kind of to transform Catholic education from within. So this is going to be, I was really inspired by the work of Stratford Caldecott when I was in grad school. And I've always had this desire to kind of like really not dumb down the faith and bring out the full potential that's within the Catholic educational tradition. I went through Catholic education almost all of my life, and I've kind of been a little bit disappointed, but I've seen what could be there. So I just am really happy to be doing the work for the Word on Fire Institute, helping other teachers not only kind of see that potential, understand the faith, but also to really kind of ignite that fire within their students and primarily their parents to really like form the next generation.
That's awesome. I didn't realize that you were uniquely inspired by the work of Stratford Caldecott. I did not know Stratford personally. I do know his daughter personally, and he sort of played I don't know, in a ways, there was something spiritual going on, because when I was in England, my wife and I, we were becoming Catholic. That was when Stratford was in the final stages of his terminal cancer. And though we had not met him, everyone in our sort of Catholic circle, as we were becoming Catholic, knew him quite well. And his quiet suffering and ultimately death was just such a testimony to the grace of God in a unique and counterintuitive way. And so it was really interesting coming into the church while we had friends who's in his daughter's case, her father or their mentor or something was passing away from cancer. But he left behind just this absolute legacy of Catholic education, of thinking about Catholic philosophy and beauty in the world that really left an impressive mark on so many people that he knew.
Oh yeah. I remember picking up his book, was it Beauty for Truth's Sake? That was my first encounter with him. And I'm like, oh, wow. Talk about really finding seeds of the word everywhere. I mean, nothing was off limits for that guy. And he kind of had that vision, that true Catholic vision, where like everything finds its honing point in the incarnate God. That so kind of inspired me. And so I've kind of been a little shocked since I've been involved in education how few people know about him. But I've been in touch with Dr. Roy Peachy, who's a great. He has a book called, I think, Out of the Classroom and Into the World, which is kind of a practical application of Stratford Caldecott's vision.
Oh, okay. Nice.
He's an Englishman himself, but he, there's just so much potential there, and I really do feel like what you said, John Paul II was calling for, is finally finding root.
Yeah, so I'm not familiar with Dr. Peachy's name. I'm glad that there are others who are doing this good work, but I'm not surprised to hear you say that he's an Englishman. Yeah. Roger Scruton, who was not a Catholic, he talked a lot about a philosophy of beauty, and to him aesthetics meant so much. And there's something about this is really kind of a half-baked idea that I've tossed around before, and I was not planning on discussing today with you, but since it came up, let's just go here. I have this idea that there's something distinctly and sort of more fundamentally Christian about so much of Europe compared to America. And I don't mean that in a social sense necessarily. There are many ways in which Europe is much more humanist and sort of anti-God than even America, although maybe that's not quite the same, not quite true anymore. But just walking around England when we lived there, houses are so close together. There's a much stronger sense of community. There's a much stronger sense of incarnational living. And then maybe most importantly, like there is an emphasis on beauty that just isn't quite shared in America. You walk, and maybe I was sort of biased, like living in Oxford, but walking around this place with Gothic spires towering everywhere over the city, and you can walk into any college on any evening, and you can be treated to evensong sung by the boys' choir of that specific college, etc. And you're just surrounded by beauty everywhere. And there are places like that, on American campuses, but it's more common that you'll just encounter this like brutalist, statist architecture at a standard state school that prides itself on excelling in, the science, technology, engineering, and math, rather than the liberal arts, rather than the pursuit of beauty.
Well, it's
go ahead.
Yeah. I sympathize with everything you're saying. I mean, it's the same experience I had. I went to Spain as a sophomore in college, and that was kind of part of my religious reawakening in a way, because I'm like, in every nook and cranny. I mean, it's like a real incarnate religion. And even when you meet like a European atheist, they're much more like you said, sometimes hostile to the faith, but that's almost a good thing because it's there. Mm-hmm. Whereas kind of here, sometimes you get this like, I don't know,
indifferentism.
Yeah. But it's hard to escape. I mean, it's like Christianity just haunts that place, even if they try to leave it, and they end up recreating it. But like you said, Roger Scruton, man, was he's a pivotal influence on me as well.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
I remember I emailed him once, and he responded within 2 hours.
Wow, that's cool. That's really cool.
Yeah, I know he was being awarded by the Polish president, and I told him I had a Polish wife, and he got me in touch with all of his people out in Poland. But to me, Andrew Petterprin, who was one of your former guests, Andrew and I talk about Roger Scruton all the time, and I mean, I feel like he got it. He really got it.
Yeah, I think you're right. I like your reference too that Christianity sort of haunts Europe, because maybe that's a good way of putting it. And it reminds me of Flannery O'Connor's line about how the South may not have been Christ. What was her? I forget the exact verbiage. It may not have been Christian, but it was certainly Christ haunted, or something to that effect. Yeah. I know she says it was certainly Christ haunted. And she by saying that, she meant that you can see echoes of Christianity throughout, even if there are perversions of it here and there are perversions of it there, and there are certainly people who don't live up to its ideals and all that, but it's haunted by Christ. And I think the same is true of Europe in a way that just doesn't apply to so much of America.
Yeah. Well, this may be controversial, but I really do think America is still a land that needs to be evangelized. So. Yeah,
I don't think there's anything controversial. I guess it's controversial to atheists who think we should never be in the business of evangelization in general, but it's certainly not controversial to this audience. Yeah,
but in the sense too of like, if you look at the city, you'll get the sense if the incarnate word has been proclaimed and structuring all things. Because it's when you look at those European cities, you can't help but think this is a humane way of living,
right?
Where it's like ultimately liturgical in the end.
Yes.
So,
Yeah, and so I mean, take Washington D.C. for example. The structural limits on how high a building can be are not set by the National Cathedral. They're set by the Washington Monument and the Capitol building, right? Yeah. Or you go into the rotunda of the Capitol building, you go into it and you look up. There's not a picture of Jesus. Separation of church and state would be the standard rallying cry. We could go into sort of the problematic ways that's interpreted. But what you do see on the rotunda is George Washington is like the apotheosis of Washington. And so George Washington is becoming God, not in a sort of Athanasius divinization sense, but rather like Washington himself is becoming God. So there's definitely some evangelization work to be done.
Yeah. The Washington, sometimes when you really think about the monuments and the architectural meaning, I kind of get a little scared when I see that.
Yeah, for sure. Well, let's shift gears and talk about our main focus. What was going to be our main focus. We'll see where the conversation takes us. But you wrote recently about St. Maximilian Kolbe, a Polish priest who gave his life to save another in Auschwitz, the concentration camp. And you wrote about this in the context of a film. And I'm a big film buff, as my listeners know. And the film is called Life for Life. Directed by a Polish movie director named Christoph Zanussi. And Life for Life tells the story of Kolbe through the lens of various people who were with him in the camp and saw him, and most particularly through the lens of the prisoner who escaped, who was then sort of the indirect cause of Kolbe's death. And so I'll let you sort of explain the circumstances there and tell us more about Maximilian Kolbe, and then I can ask you a few more questions about the film and about the life of Maximilian Kolbe.
Yeah, like you said, the movie begins with the escape of the prisoner, who, as a consequence of that, 10 prisoners are sent to the starvation bunker. One of whom is Maximilian Kolbe, who takes the place of I think his name is Franciszek Grajownicki.
I was not even going to try to pronounce that. So I'm glad you did.
Well, I practiced with my wife this morning, and I think 10 attempts weren't enough. Okay. But yeah, I mean, he took the place of Franciszek, knowing that he was a father and a husband. And he didn't even give his name. He just said he was a Catholic priest. And so there was this. The movie kind of explores the aftermath of that and trying to figure out whether indeed it was Maximilian Kolbe who took the place of this man. And the movie just gets into. I'll hold off on the movie for a second, but Maximilian Kolbe, this wasn't really surprising to anyone that it was him, because his whole life was just one endless self-gift. He was basically a martyr, if you want to say, in terms of giving witness to the faith of this total self-surrendering love his whole life. Kolbe just has, I mean, if you really want to know, like, have a model for a great entrepreneur, it's Maximilian Kolbe. That man did so much in his short lifetime. He I think, excelled at physics. Then he got a PhD in philosophy, then in theology. Then he started magazine in Poland. And then he went off to go found something in Shanghai, then went to Japan, then to India, then back to Poland and founded this monastery. Yeah,
and he did most of this with essentially one functioning lung, because tuberculosis had left him with basically one good lung too. It's incredible.
It really is. I mean, and the movie gets into this too. Mm-hmm. Like, for him to survive as long as he did in the bunker was just miraculous. But yeah, I mean, that guy was tough.
For him to survive that long in Auschwitz in general was miraculous. Yeah. I mean, just the fact that he made it that far, it's crazy.
I remember the first time I saw Maximilian Kolbe, I was like, oh man, that guy looks kind of stern. I mean, most saints kind of have that stern look, and I know pictures, other than Americans, maybe when people don't really smile for photos in the past, right. But he was just tough and just good. And the movie does a wonderful job of getting into that, and how everybody kind of admired him for this. But he didn't have this kind of like finger wagging Catholicism, but he took on himself. He really imitated Christ throughout his life. So like, I don't know if you want to hear like a little bit of the history of how I came to know about Maximilian Kolbe.
Oh, please. Yeah, let's do that.
Well, I mean, Chicago is such a Polish place. So you're going to always get your, litany of Polish saints there. And, I was always kind of impressed by the guy when I was young. But when I met my wife, I finally really started to learn more about him. She's, like you said, she's from Poland. And it wasn't until when I was graduating, how sometimes you hear your whole life about things that Catholics believe in, but you don't. It takes like an experience to actually realize what that means.
Sure.
So I never really had a sense of like the intercession of the saints until I remember at the John Paul II Institute, one of the guys there, Nick Bellagio, told me, because I was looking for a job and I was kind of worried. I was newlywed. I thought everything was going to kind of work out. And he's like, you know what? The greatest intercessor is Maximilian Kolbe.
Oh, wow.
Pray to him. Yeah, pray to him. Maximilian Kolbe and St. Joseph. And the funny thing was, so I started doing this. And then I got a job. And right where the job was next to Marytown, which is the national shrine of Maximilian Kolbe. That's in Libertyville, Illinois. And so, being a part of Marytown, I really came to appreciate Father Maximilian Kolbe even more. So yeah, I mean, he is such a great saint, and if you're looking for a good intercessor, I encourage you to pray to him.
Yeah, and he had a particularly strong devotion to the Blessed Virgin.
Yeah.
So I don't know the history of Marytown. Was it named Marytown because it's his shrine, or did they put the shrine there because it's Marytown? Either way, he'd love the name because that was his singular devotion.
Yeah, I do think it has something to do with, I couldn't tell you the exact history. I know Marytown was at first, it was I think a convent of Benedictine nuns.
Wow.
But then the conventional Franciscans took it over, I think in the 70s, and it became Marytown. So I think it's the national shrine outside of Niepokalanów, which is the monastery he founded out in Poland. I think it's one of the only centers that is a shrine like that.
Wow.
To him. So
yeah, and so I've seen that name written. What was it that you just said?
Yeah,
I don't want to try.
Niepokalanów. Oh gosh, I think it has to be. I think it's the. Oh, my wife is going to be really mad. I don't know.
Disappointed.
Yeah. I think it's like it references the Virgin Mary.
I think it is something like Marytown, isn't it, in Polish?
Well, yeah, Niepokalanów. I think like without immaculate one, the immaculate one. So. Yeah,
but that
was
his community that he founded, and he had this extreme devotion to the. I don't mean extreme in a bad way, obviously, but this very strong extreme devotion to the Blessed Virgin. And one of the things that he did, you alluded to this in your sort of description of his accomplishments, but he started this militia, which was not a militia in the earthly sense, but a militia in the mission, evangelization, and intercession sense, the militia of the Immaculata. And this, I forget exactly what the numbers were, but I think it grew to over 1 million in his lifetime, at least close to it, and still continues today, by the way. I think there are 4 million members of the Militia of the Immaculata throughout the world. There are a lot in Europe, obviously, especially Poland, I would imagine. But they just did so much work and had multiple newspapers translated in multiple languages with circulations in the hundreds of thousands as well. All while he's doing this with one lung and fighting the Nazis, not literally, but hiding Jews who are running from the Nazis and everything. Obviously, it ultimately cost him his life, but his life is such a case study in charity. And one of the things, we can talk about the movie in a sec, but one of the things I liked about your article is that you argue that this is that his ultimate act of life, or greater love has no one than this, that a man lay down his life for his friends. That's what Kolbe did. And even more so, Kolbe didn't do it for his friend. He didn't lay down his life for his friend. He laid down his life for a fellow campmate who couldn't face the horrors of Auschwitz. And so Maximilian Kolbe said, I'll do it. And you articulate this in your article, that it is divine grace alone that allows us to do this. Mm-hmm. And then you quote, let me look at the article exactly to find this quote, because it was really good. But it was, and I'm looking for it now and I can't find it, but you'll know what I'm talking about, because you were quoting a thinker who said that basically if the gospel is even proven by one story, then it's true.
Henri de Lubac, yeah.
Yes, it was de Lubac. That's what it was.
I'm trying to think of the exact
I just found it. One deed alone, where the living gospel asserts itself, is sufficient to justify the gospel forever.
Yeah.
And let me read that one more time. One deed alone, where the living gospel asserts itself, is sufficient to justify the gospel forever. Mm-hmm. And there's a lot to meditate on that, just in that passage alone, that one sentence. But your assertion is that Kolbe made this act in Auschwitz. That Kolbe's act is one deed where the living gospel asserts itself. This gospel that upholds the weak. This gospel that proclaims it is a just and heroic thing to lay down your life for one's friend, despite receiving nothing in return, despite potentially being condemned to anonymity for the rest of your life. Mm-hmm. Kolbe obviously had no idea he was going to be a saint. He didn't go to, as you mentioned, he didn't go to his death saying, my name is Maximilian Kolbe, make sure this gets back to the Pope, right, for my eventual beatification and canonization. No, he just said, I'm a Catholic priest, right? I imagine he fully expected to die in anonymity, and he still did it. He still volunteered his life.
Well, I mean, in him, you really see what deification looks like by the cross. I mean, it's like, I know there was controversy whether or not he was actually a martyr. He eventually was deemed to be a martyr of charity, I believe. But
Similar to Edith Stein, by the way.
Yeah.
You know, in very similar situation, dying in a concentration camp, right? But is this person really a martyr if they didn't say, like, I believe in Jesus, and then that's why they were killed, directly? But yeah, martyr of charity is definitely an apt description.
But what I like about in this movie is it shows, like, in him, you see the passion. You see Christ pouring himself out in total self-gift, at taking the place of the one who should be the one who's punished, right? Throughout the movie, you just see the kind of juxtaposition of the Eucharist in some ways with the act that Kolbe shows.
Yeah, and I like your point too. That the person the prisoner who Kolbe replaced, not a super attractive person in the film. Like he comes across as like rather weak-willed and just not a likable person.
He's kind of squealing like a pig. I mean, in some way, it is pathetic.
Yeah, it is pathetic. Yeah, it's a good word for it. And Kolbe steps up and says, "I'll go instead." And then so you mentioned Kolbe's credentials prior to this. I don't know what the credentials of the person he replaced are, but probably not as impressive as Kolbe's from a just sheer pedigree standpoint. But the gospel doesn't. The gospel is the gospel, irrespective of how many PhDs you have and how well you did in physics, right? And what how many printing presses you ran, et cetera. The gospel isn't about any of those things, and Kolbe shows us that very well.
Yeah, there's one line in the movie when it's like, why would he lay his life down for like a stranger like this? And I think it's the carpenter who knew Kolbe very well says he understood that all life comes from God. And all life is full of dignity. And so you see, too, that Kolbe, because of his faith, he sees things in a different light. I mean, I don't know if you want to get into the movie, but
let's do it, yeah.
Okay, but the main character of the movie is played by Christoph Waltz. Okay, his name's Jan. I don't know if you guys know Christoph Waltz. He's one of my favorite actors on the scene today. He's famous from Tarantino's Inglourious Basterds.
Yeah. He's in several Tarantino movies, yeah.
Oh, yeah. But he's a great actor. And I believe Zanussi, because he's rather young in this film. Mm-hmm. And I've heard Zanussi, the director, say to him, just wait. Eventually somebody's going to discover you on the international scene, and you're going to be a star. Oh, and wow. That did turn out to be the case.
Yeah.
But he plays this role very well of Jan just trying to run away, not only from like the Nazis, but from the love of Kolbe. The very first scene is of this German shepherd going to retrieve a stick in the muck, and to me, it hit me as like a metaphor for the whole film.
Yeah.
The dog, in some ways, is like the hound of God, right? The hound of the Lord, who's after the one who's stuck in the muck. And then the next scene, after retrieving the muck, Jan somehow comes out of the dirt, arises.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
But the whole time, I mean, he does it on his own terms, right? He gets out himself. And so I think he thinks the whole of life is just survival. The survival, there's nothing like, providence. There is no such thing.
Yeah, it's random. It's Nietzschean about, just self-will and strength.
Yeah, life is absurd. Just a little side note. I mean, Christoph Zanussi does such a good job with this film. I think because he has a philosophy background. Zanussi, I know he studied philosophy at the Jagiellonian, and so all of his films kind of are dealing with these existential questions. But I mean, the whole film it's great. It's great because Jan is curious to see, well, okay, who was this guy? This is out of the ordinary. Nobody would have done this in Auschwitz. Everybody knows that. And so he's also, though, he's haunted by this great act.
That's what I was going to say, yeah, because he's running from it, but he also can't stop talking about it. And there's one or two scenes where someone's like, why do you care about this so much? Like, why do you care about this priest so much? You keep asking me. Why do you keep talking about him?
Yeah. And you see the very last, I don't want to give away the movie, but he really regrets what he did. You'll see that he never gets married. And there's one scene when some woman says, you should find you a wife like me. And he says, oh, I'm not even worthy of that. But right after that, he encounters Kolbe again, and he finally gets on his knees, and you have this Wojciech Kilar soundtrack. I don't know if you guys know him, the great Polish composer.
I didn't know that's who it was. Yeah.
Oh yeah,
That's
but
cool.
he's kind of, it's this pounding beat that is just kind of like pressing in, like the love is confronting him, and he finally accepts it.
Yeah.
And in some ways
Falls
you
to
can
his
see.
knees.
Yeah, falls to his knees, and it's like he's finally healed. He has this encounter. He is no longer going to see himself probably as this, worm of the earth who has, caused the death of 10 people. But I just thought it was all so wonderfully done. And that's why I chose this film at the start of this Christian States of Life class that I had to teach. Because I'm like, who do we see this whole thing, this way of life embodied in, but the saints? And I thought Maximilian Kolbe was somebody who'd only be good for the students, because I was teaching at a school across from Marytown. So I wanted them to then have a special encounter with Kolbe. And I think the film did the job.
That's awesome. I'm glad the students liked it. One other thing I'll add about the film, at least if I understood this part correctly, Jan, the prisoner who escapes, is trying to figure out, as are others, who the person was who Kolbe saved. And we find out that person died in the camp, right?
Franciszek?
Yeah, isn't Franciszek the one who died?
I think that's remember he's having like a meal with the guy who also was liberated. This is after the war. And then one guy thinks, it could have been him.
Yeah.
And remember he ate the food too quickly and I think died because of that.
Yes.
And that wasn't the guy.
That wasn't the guy. Okay.
I don't think so. I mean, I believe I only know this, and I think this might be right because of my Polish wife. But the Franciszek, I think, was with like John Paul II at the canonization.
Oh, wow. Okay. I didn't realize that.
Yeah, because it says, I think, later that he went on to be like a soldier of some kind. So, yeah, but I'll have to check. I'm not completely sure on that.
So maybe I just misunderstood that, because it is true that the person who he said it might have been this guy, that guy ends up dying. But the interesting thing to me is that doesn't actually affect the uprightness or the goodness of Kolbe's action, right? So it's not just like he saved this person who went on to cure cancer, or to who went on to do this other thing. He saved this person, and that was fundamentally a good thing, even if that person would die the next day, right? Because that person is a human who has inherent dignity, who's worth saving. And so it doesn't really matter who it was that he saved, right? It's not he didn't save him because of his credentials or because of what he would go on to do. He saved him because he was a human being worthy of being saved. And I thought that was another good reflection of the film. Mm-hmm. But I think I'll just have to go back and see. I didn't know that we knew who the person was who was saved, but that's amazing if he was there for the canonization.
I believe so. And what you said too about the kind of utilitarian logic of it. I mean, you see in the movie, there's a journalist who's a communist who was in the camp as well. I mean, he's one of my favorite characters in the film, because I mean, this film doesn't though go to like any thought you may have why Kolbe did this thing, like. Maybe he just wanted to be well known. Maybe he was mentally deranged or a lunatic of some kind, or maybe the church just wants to find its saint.
That came
some
through
political
with that journalist.
Yeah. The movie explores those areas, and it kind of all those types of answers come up short.
Fall flat. Yeah.
Yeah, and I remember at one point the journalist, he's talking. His wife is saying, "Well, can you not believe that a man like him do such a thing?" And he expresses his hatred for the church. And she says, "Well, you're so prejudiced. And what if he did it for you?" And he's like, "I can't believe that the devil," what does he say? Something along the lines of the devil would just allow somebody to take the place of somebody else. And then he looks up and kind of I always imagine he's looking at the cross that possibly is in the house, recognizing the thing that he just said. Yeah. But the communists, they don't want him publishing this, because they just want it to seem like, they want him to publish something on somebody dying for like a liberal cause.
Yes,
like
exactly.
A teacher dying for his or her student, or a
Right,
doctor for the patient, or
Yep.
something else. And he's like, I know nothing. I'm like, I'm not saying that those things don't exist, but
Yeah.
the guy says, I know I'd be fabricating something.
Yeah.
This thing really happened.
He's like, we don't have those. Yeah.
Yeah. And you see in like the history, even in communism, later in Polish history with figures like Popiełuszko, Father Popiełuszko, they don't want those acts of total love to get out. They want to tell a different narrative. But in the end, only love prevails. So
Yeah. That's beautiful. Yeah, it's a good film. And I haven't mentioned this, but if you want to see the film, go to form.org. You can find it there. It's not on Netflix, not on Prime Video, I think you can rent it through Prime. But if you want to see it for free, go to form.org. Your parish likely has a subscription. If not, I think there's a way you can get a subscription for free through form.org. So just go to form.org. It's called Life for Life. I will also say, it doesn't play out like a modern 20th century American film. It's pretty slow paced, heavy on dialogue, even heavier on sort of slow moving scenes without much dialogue. And it's all black and white. The translations it's a Polish film, so it's made in Polish. There's obviously German in the scenes in the camps, but there are subtitles. So it's just it's going to be different, and different experience than the more recent films of the modern cinema, but that's not a bad thing. It's a good film and definitely worth watching. So,
oh yeah.
Let's shift gears just a little bit, although it's not really shifting gears. I think it's more just kind of putting a nightcap on this. As we wrap up this conversation, Robert, what can we learn from Maximilian Kolbe about the call to holiness? And I like to end a lot of my conversations on this, as you and I were talking before we hit the record button. The call to holiness is something that is, I think, only beginning to be fully understood by certainly American Catholics, probably global Catholics, though. This is something... St. Josemaria obviously talked a lot about the universal call to holiness. The Council Fathers of the Second Vatican Council talked about this. And I think for many decades, their words fell on deaf ears, but we're starting to see a return to the call to holiness. I'm not saying that people weren't holy in the intervening years. Obviously, we have some great saints who really took seriously the call to holiness. But I think there's, in part because of this new media, new evangelization effort that we were talking about a few minutes ago, there's a renewed emphasis, a renewed push, a renewed understanding of what the universal call to holiness looks like and how we live it out in our everyday. And in a time when we are so tempted to just get caught up in all the various movements of the world, political movements and social movements, and even ecclesiastical movements, just sort of going to war with others in the church and acting like every issue is one that we need to be heard on and that we need to blog about and vlog about and podcast about. And maybe I'm guilty of this as well. But, rather than doing that, I think there's slowly but surely there's an understanding that we need to be emphasizing our own holiness. We need to be walking the path of Christ. So in the context of the life of Maximilian Kolbe, what can we learn from him, from this film, from his life, from his example?
Yeah. As I said about martyrdom, kind of this embodying of the passion, which is this becoming Christ, like fully one with the Son. I think that Maximilian Kolbe, in the sense that by becoming one with the Son, he was just totally in relation, to the Father. I see holiness as this longing, this total self-surrender, self-gift to God, in the Son, through the Spirit, to the Father, that Maximilian Kolbe, just his whole existence was caught up in the Spirit like that. And he became Christ-like. And all of us are called to that, all of us, not just the, religious or priests, but everyone. And I think that what Vatican II was calling for in the modern world was this kind of and the new evangelization is saying, hey, we're supposed to become, as Christians, we're becoming sons of the Son. It's all relation. It's all relation. We're in the divine life. That's what Christianity is all about.
Yeah.
And Maximilian Kolbe's the act that we know him most for, just, it's not like some spontaneous thing that came out of nowhere. It was just the further it was just the logic that he was living his
That's a
whole
good
life. He
point.
couldn't do anything but that.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, I know you talked to Dr. Larry Chapp an awful lot about the call to holiness, and he's great on this with Dorothy Day and Peter Marin and the Catholic Worker. But for me, I know a lot of people, when I have this tendency myself, when you become Catholic, you just want to go out there and like, it almost becomes about you, where you're like, okay, I'm just going to tweet to the world and try to get as many followers as possible and tell everyone about my experience and all that stuff. And you forget that, no, it's actually not about you. It's about Christ and what he's done for everyone. And I remember I met some professors that Dr. Larry Chapp knows as well at the John Paul II Institute. And I have to say, they're some of the holiest men and women I've ever met in my whole life. There was just something authentically holy about them.
That's
and
awesome.
that was so attractive.
Yeah.
And they weren't on Twitter. They weren't on all the social media. And that's a calling for some people, but they discerned their calling, I think, rightly. And that was that they followed their vocation, and that was extremely attractive. So, yeah, this is something that I'm very glad that you're talking about, because in today's world, with practical atheism, we oftentimes say we believe in God, but
our actions indicate otherwise.
Yeah. No, really. I mean, I'm so embarrassed oftentimes how oftentimes I exist as if God doesn't exist.
Yeah.
I mean, I live my life in a way that my priorities aren't the ones that the faith calls for. And I have a hard time seeing my brother as, a brother in the Lord.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, no, that's well said. And the problem with practical atheism is, I think, it's one that's pervasive. It's totally pervasive. And I just think, we have an adoration chapel down the street, and I go there weekly. I have a weekly commitment there. If if my priorities were in order, I would go in addition to that. When I had free time, I wouldn't, sit here and waste my time watching a Marvel movie or whatever. I would probably go to adoration, right? And so there's an element of practical atheism that guides even the most simple of my choices and just how I spend my time. And so you're right. I frequently I make choices as if God did not exist, or at the very least, in that he didn't exist in the way that I claim to believe he exists, right? And so I think we always have to be on our guard about that. And I think we have to be extra vigilant. Your mention of these professors who were not on Twitter or Instagram or whatever, who didn't have big social platforms, I think that's really on point. And I'm not saying social platforms are inherently...
Well, for sure. Maximilian Kolbe would probably take advantage of this.
He probably had a Twitter account.
Yeah.
He probably had a blue check on Twitter. So it's not that they're bad, but it's that they certainly can be stumbling blocks to holiness. And, speaking for myself, I can say that I have a Twitter account, and I also have a Twitter sports account that's mostly consumption only, because I like sports and I sort of follow various, sports beat writers and everything. But, I have a Twitter account for more current events and Catholic things. And I don't check it because checking it I've found, for me personally, does not increase my holiness, does not lead me to sanctity. And so what I'll do is, when I release a new episode, like this one, for example, I'll probably post it on Twitter so that people who do follow me can see it. But I'm not interested in extended discussions. I'm not interested in debates on Twitter. I'm certainly not interested in scrolling my timeline. What do they call it? Doom scrolling, right? Which is pretty apt, because it gives you a sense of doom about everything going on in the church and in the world, when you could just be praying and trying to grow in holiness and leading your children to Christ and all of those things. So I appreciate that you mentioned social media, because I think we do need to be really careful about it.
Yeah, and I'd be a hypocrite if I am the worst with checking out things on social media. I mean, so I don't want to come off like I'm immune from any.
No,
of this,
you didn't come across that way. I just think that you're correct in sort of diagnosing that needs to be a part of our self-evaluation. How are my internet habits leading me towards or away from God? So. Yeah.
And I think, with all, because this permeates most of our lives, and so thinking about holiness in light of this stuff is really important.
Yeah, totally agree. Well, as we do close, since we're out of time, Robert, you're the education fellow at Word on Fire Institute. You mentioned this new course that you're putting together. How can people find out about the work you're doing or follow along with it or sign up and join the Word on Fire Institute? Because I know there's lots of resources there, especially for lay members of the church who just want to dive deeper and grow the relationship with God.
Yeah. I mean, I would first of all encourage them to sign up for the Word on Fire Institute. Within like the next year, we're going to be creating this module specifically for educators, but that also includes parents and elementary teachers as well. So I encourage everybody to sign up. We're trying to kind of grow this Word on Fire movement, which is all about the new evangelization. So if you're really interested in the things that we talked about today, and also interested in that vision that Stratford Caldecott outlines, I encourage you to sign up.
Perfect. Sounds good. Well, yeah, so go check that out at wordonfire.institute. And then you should also check out Robert's blog, Mixa, Mixa.com. So you can go there and you can see the blog post. I'll link it in the show notes, but you can see the blog post we talked about with St. Maximilian Kolbe and some other recent ones on deification, divinization, and practical atheism and the call to holiness. So lots of the things we talked about today. Robert, it was great to chat with you. Thanks so much for joining me on
Zach.
Creedal.
Thank you.
For sure. You're welcome anytime. And if any of my listeners or viewers want to get in touch with Robert, I'd be happy to pass along an email. So you can send me a note, Zach@creedalpodcast.com, and I'll be happy to pass it on to Robert. So feel free to do that. Send me a note and let me know what you thought of this conversation. And let me know if there's other content that you want me to do or other conversations you want. Maybe we could have Robert back on and dive into a topic we touched on today if you want to hear more about that. So just send me a note, Zach@creedalpodcast.com. And until next time, God bless you.